So first off, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to have the discussion around breadth versus depth. Does scale matter in philanthropy? I'm actually going to, we're sticking to not your typical summit. So rather than waiting to call them name by name, if I could actually have the panelists up on stage and join me. So we are truly going to make this unconventional. So the fourth panelist is you. So as we ask the panel each question, there will be an open text question on Slido, and I really genuinely want you to, that literally says, what is something you wish that was said that didn't get said around this question? So please go ahead and chime in your answer, and we will actually make sure that before we move on to the next question, we go ahead and take that into account. So I am very excited today to be joined by a panel that is demographically distributed. We were just jokingly talking about that, about generations and ages and spans of where we are coming from. So I am Neha Gupta. I'm the Teach for India US Executive Director, and I am going to let lovely panelists who've joined us today introduce themselves. So Vipul, if maybe we can start with you, that would be amazing.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. She meant multi-generational, so yeah, I'm the 50 plus on this panel, just in case you didn't figure it out yourself. Vipul Khanna, I have born in my beloved Dehradun, lived in my life, first 40 years in India, then moved here 10 years ago. I have built 4 businesses in different forms of ownership and different forms of scale, getting ready for my 5th one. That's the business side of it. And I've been engaged with a couple of not-for-profits, especially Teach for India now for a few years. So that's been my professional journey, and as we come, I'll talk about my philanthropic journey.
That would be amazing. So Vipul joins us to give us a perspective of many of us in the room that are philanthropists or planning to think about how do we engage and shift gears from our corporate journeys. We also are joined by Navya Akinapalli. Navya, if you could please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Navya. I was born in Hyderabad. I grew up in Texas, and my whole family moved back to Hyderabad right as I was finishing high school. And after I graduated from college, I'm an engineer. I joined the Teach for India Fellowship back in 2012, and that changed the trajectory of my life.
Navya, thank you. And then last but not the least, we're joined by Janvi Udani, who I know there's been a lot of conversation around Gen Z. She's almost on the border of that. So Janvi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm Janvi. I am from Gujarat in India. I'm also an engineer. And right after my engineering, I joined the Teach for India Fellowship as well. And that truly did change the trajectory of my life. Post which I came to the US to pursue my master's. And now I'm working as a data analyst in the nonprofit sector. So yeah, very excited to be here.
And I promise I didn't make the pitch earlier about talent in this space. But I think one of the reasons we wanted to have these different perspectives is really, so I've personally come from a very wide and deep conversation across my own career journey. So I'm ex-Wall Street. I've been part of 200-year-old institutions like the New York Stock Exchange, started a startup, exited it, run the PE gamut. And I think most of us have sort of grappled somewhere along the way of where do we spend our time or money? Is it going deep into something, or is it going into something that has a very broad span? But everybody here has been brought to their philanthropic journeys very differently at different places and phases. So maybe Vipul, if you could tell us a little bit of what got you into philanthropy, that would be great.
Yeah. So as I said, I grew up in a usual lower middle class environment, had the great foundation of a convent education, right, English medium. Right, a great family, loving family to kind of build that up. And as I have had the privilege of building businesses and doing businesses around the world, having a great network of friends and family and people who I can count on for mentors, for business, for whatever, right? That appreciation of that compared to sort of what I see sometimes now, one, I look back and think it was the kindness of a lot of people in my journey which allowed me to get here. There was a period of time when money was really in short supply, anything counted, and somebody in the extended family stepped up. And that money, for me, mattered at that time, right? It could have been this way or that way, right? Luckily, it kind of went this way. So if I look back, it's been a lot of pivots around in my journey, whether a manager, whether an extended family, or an investor, whose kindness allowed me to kind of live the life of privilege that I have. Second, I think there is something about getting old, right? It does make you question. to some extent, I also have guilt to say when you're having fun, sometimes it kind of gnaws back and say, you see something and say like, what am I doing here? Like the dichotomy hits you. So I think there's that element of guilt kind of comes out. And fundamentally, I think it's that sense of how do you start to do something, the old cliched, from success to significance? How do you get the true fulfillment of doing something? So I think there has been a time and season for a lot of things in my life, and it feels like this is the time and season for doing something more than what's just for me and my family and my business needs. That's kind of
amazing. I think, so I joke and say everybody in India is an engineer, right? I think, I'm also an engineer, by the way, by training. What made you want to be in the philanthropic sector? Like, why not do the traditional thing?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined the Teach for India Fellowship, my parents were, to put it very mildly, not feeling that great about it. And for me, the big thing when I joined the fellowship was, what does it take to build a nation and to make it better? And I joined the Teach for India Fellowship because I truly saw that the classroom and what happens inside the classroom is a picture of what happens outside of the classroom and in society at large. And when I joined the fellowship, it was clear to me that there is a lot of systemic barriers and structures that deter upward social and economic mobility, and being a part of the classroom for 2 years really helped me understand the realities of that on the day-to-day. And after that, my parents thought I would be doing my MBA, going to the Ivy League that I've always dreamt of going, but I continued to stay on in the nonprofit sector because growing up, I always had tremendous privilege. My parents moved here and immigrated here in the 90s. My dad got an H-1B visa, and that helped us to come. We had a lot of family support to move here, and that brought me a lot of privilege in giving access to the best public schools in the United States. And then after I moved back to India, I went to one of the best engineering colleges, and it dawned to me that I don't want to live every day thinking about, okay, how can I make my life better, but what is a legacy I want to leave for generations to come? And being and living in India, I saw tremendous potential of the children around me, of the communities, and there's just so much untapped potential that I wanted to dig into and understand more of. So after that, I worked in the education sector for a few years. I didn't move out of the education sector. And since the past 8.5 years, I've been leading Learning Equality. It's an education technology nonprofit. And right now, since the past few years, I've been deeply in philanthropy as a fundraiser on that side of things. And what does it take to build a global education technology nonprofit? What does it take to build programs in different countries around the world? And what does it take to move resources? And Manu was talking about this in the previous panel, and I resonated with it so deeply about how equity and the resources that need to be redistributed in order to ensure power is redistributed across society is something that brings me to philanthropy always.
Awesome. And then I know you are just on the cusp of, your journey might not be as lengthy yet, but what's brought you to the journey of philanthropic space?
So I graduated from engineering right when COVID was happening. And there was a lot of distress that I saw around me, like in my immediate surroundings, whether it was the house helps, kids who could not go to school or access healthcare. And that did somewhere touched me a lot. So I decided I definitely want to study or learn or work in the economic development sector. And I just happened to come across Teach for India at that time. I thought I'll apply, let's see what it is about. It looks very different from the traditional private school education that I had the privilege of having. But then when things started happening, I did not initially realize what philanthropic organizations or a non-profit or working in that would look like. But once I did start, I realized this is definitely the space I want to be in, because it did feel like I had a ripple effect of impact. It was not just limited to the students in my classroom. It was going way, way, way beyond that, even in those 2 years of my fellowship.
Amazing. So obviously, apologies for the education bias, but my mom's a teacher, and I've had a lifetime of working on EdTech, amongst many things. So I have a deep passion for it. I think Ramesh was sharing earlier that it's one of the things that I find to be the fastest pathway to cycle breaking from when it comes to intergenerational poverty. But I think one of the things that we would love to hear from you before we dive into the next topic is a quick poll on really this conversation of depth versus breadth, right? All of them have very different experiences in their journey. But when you look at philanthropic organizations, whether that is to give your time or your money, how do you rank the significance of depth versus breadth? So again, for those that may have joined us this afternoon, if you point your camera to that QR code, you will be able to join the Slido. I really do want to encourage you to do it, because the one after this, we're gonna keep the questions open for everybody to actually comment into. But we are interested in knowing which do you give priority to in your philanthropic decision making, and you can actually rank them, because I know that there's no easy answer to this, right? We kind of in an ideal world would get it all, but it's not always realistically possible, right? So if you can take a second for me and go ahead and chime in, I'd really appreciate it. I guess one of the things that I'd be curious to hear from each of you is, Vipul, would you say your journey has been more depth, breadth, one has appealed more than the other? Like what's driven the most impact for you?
Yeah. I guess start with depth and then the replicability. So I'll give an example. I'm a product of the India rising from an IT services BPO sort of environment. We had a startup, we did a bunch of business 4 or 5 years, very focused on one part of the banking and financial services sector. We struggled and reached a stage, and then we sold that business to Cognizant, right, way back. And I noticed that my 0 to 50, let's call it, journey was this much, and then 50 to 2 billion journey was kind of roughly the same amount of time. So I saw the advantage of having a brand, access to clients. We started with one industry, then we went to the second industry and third industry, banking, insurance, healthcare, life science. We could go across industry verticals. And we started from North America, then to Europe, Asia, right? We could go across different geographies. And then we added new services. And the fact that you had the same organization umbrella that you could offer wide businesses was very instructive for me, that you could take a narrow sort of thing and then spread it out, because you have the playbook, right? You can replicate the playbook, and you have the brand permission to attract talent, and you have the brand permission to get into a client and say, hey, we do this, we don't do this for you, but we could do this as well for you, right? So that was kind of the business example. Now, coming to philanthropy, one of the most instructive stories, which I'm sure all of you have heard, is that little fish on the beach story, right? That there are millions of fish stranded on the beach, and a child is walking with a parent, and the child starts to throw back the fish one by one into the water, right? And the parents are like, what are you doing? Like, it won't make a difference, right? Like, there are millions of fish on this miles of beachfront. And the child says, but it matters to that one, right? You heard that story, right? I read this story, I don't know, the back of a magazine or something. It was very powerful for me, that to the recipient it matters. The scale, the technology, the strategy, the fundraise, all, but to the recipient it matters on the one hand. On the other hand, once I started digging into that and doing a little bit here and there, I was listening to Shaheen, who's the founder of TFI, and she was first the founder of Akanksha, which was setting up schools, right? And then she started TFI. And she was saying that Akanksha worked one school at a time. TFI, through fellows like this, has a multiplier impact. And then there is a second layer impact where those fellows like you are, and possibly you are, and others, they go out and start their journey in the social sector. So the multiplier effect is amazing. So I was there last year, and I did a panel or like a little workshop with about 8 TFI ex-entrepreneurs who are social entrepreneurs who have been fellows and now have their own foundations and not-for-profits. And after a long time, as I went into a basement in Delhi, we sat on the floor, we had all day long sitting with them. One, it was the most powerful day I had all of last year, meeting such 8 bright, committed people. But each one of them had their own personal experience. And they had taken that, their need, their foundational journey, and translated into a not-for-profit. Or a couple of them were working for a large not-for-profit. So sitting with those 8 people and seeing the impact of those 8, the second ripple effect was amazing for me. So yeah, I tend to kind of now wear around to say, start this way, but then scale has to come quickly. Scale has to come quickly.
All right, fair enough. Navya, I know you've, to some extent, had a journey that's similar, but in a very different space. So what made you go wide?
The fellowship was very much depth, I would say. Every single day, I would see the impact of my teaching on my kids in the community at large. Every single day, I would know that. And that really gave me an insight and a nuanced understanding of what equity actually means. I think before the fellowship, I was a very idealistic person. I want to go change India. I want to make everything better. And then after the fellowship, reality hits you that it takes decades of work and it takes a lot of systemic change and working with the communities in order to make change happen. And after the fellowship, every single role I took after that, if I'm faced with a tough question, even now, when we started growing learning equality, we're an education technology nonprofit, and we build open source teaching and learning solutions for areas around the world without access to internet, and everything that we do is free and it's a public good. But the experience that I got from the depth of work that we did within the Teach for India Fellowship guides every single decision or the partnership or the programs that I help design as being a co-executive director at Learning Equality. And for me, it's not whether it should be depth or breadth, it's more of how do you understand the catalytic effects of the depth of the work that you can then translate into breadth and scale. And for me, that was a clear connection between the work that I do at Learning Equality and creating free open source public goods shows how you can have impact at scale, but also learn from localized solutions, have organizations take ownership of their work, take ownership and contextualize it for their own needs. And that to me is a big marker of what impact at scale can be with both depth and breadth.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, quick question, show of hands, right? So we'll do it the slightly old-fashioned way, intentionally, because I think it'll get everybody up as well. I know it's a post-lunch, afternoon. I think we need more chai, right? But how many people here largely invest in organizations that do really deep work with their community, either their time or money, it doesn't matter. Okay, and how many people really go for more of how many of those organizations have models that are replicable, but either haven't gotten there or you don't think have the capacity or the talent to get there? Okay, good. A lot of hands went down, by the way, for everybody who can't see the room, right? So, I'm not going to bother asking the third, because in a good way we can see the distribution in the room that thankfully none of you are purely just going by what is the biggest number you can throw on the board for impact. So that is fantastic, right? This whole conversation around the depth is easier to understand, right? Because it's very personal. There's a lot of stories that come out of that depth where you can point to this one person, it's that one fish, right? It immediately tugs at you and it comes through. But should people make scale a factor of consideration, right? Because I think there were still some hands up when you said, oh, it can't go across, or maybe the org doesn't have capacity to go across. But as leaders, as philanthropists, is that something we should be looking for and pushing people towards? Vipul, if maybe we can start with you.
So you said depth and scale, or you said scale?
Should scale matter? Like if somebody's doing depth, great. Like, do you just stay the course, right? I won't name the nonprofit, but one of the reasons for the idea behind this panel is they got asked by a very major donor that, like, why do you work in 4 verticals, right? You raise all this money, just spend it all in one vertical and focus, and you will do so much better than doing this, this, and this, right? So it, again, should scale matter, right?
So since we are sitting in the heart of Silicon Valley, one of the good sayings going around, which I think is attributed to Reid Hoffman, he said that every startup starts up like a pirate, but eventually it has to become like a navy, right? You have to find their way to become the navy. As a pirate, you can get a flash in the pan, but to make a difference, you have to institutionalize. You have to have the legitimacy of scale, whatever else kind of stuff. So in that context, yeah, I do believe that. I was naively asking Shaheen once that we are in an era where the Indian government has long on policy, right? It thinks good policy, it has good execution chops. Shouldn't the education problem solved by just doing more budgetary allocation, right? So I don't know what the percentage is, but if it's 4%, why can't we do 8% and problem solved, right? And then when she answered, I kind of humbled me by their answer that it's not just about resources, right? It's so much muscle memory of customs and culture and lack of skills and execution skills, et cetera, et cetera. So you take the context of the problem areas and you take the whole pirate versus navy analogy. I think very few startups go up to scale up and become metas, right? Meta itself is made up of 3 or 4, hydro-powered sort of, WhatsApp and Instagram, which kind of done that. So to solve problems at scale, I think it takes institutional grade processes, it takes institutional grade branding and stuff like that. And we're talking very complex problems. I think the muscle required is far more. So yeah, I think scale for the kind of complex problems that we want to solve.
Vipul, I 100% agree with you. In what I know, diabetes, okay, we're trying to tackle diabetes throughout India. You cannot do it for one family or 10 families and be happy and satisfied that you have done your best. No, can't rest till you have a workable solution for the population of India, for as complex a country as India, with north and south and vegetarian and non-vegetarian and rich and poor, and it really is complex. Diabetes in India is huge. And if we solve it in India, if we have a workable model in India, it is translatable to lots of other geographies like Mexico, which is also, or the Middle East, which is also culturally, it's going to work. What we will deliver in India probably will translate to other parts of the world. But to answer your question, scale, thinking of scale from the beginning, not being happy with pilots, working with the academics to get the RCTs done so that the funders will believe that you've got behavior change results that are good enough. Have a leap of faith, dear funder, because we need that leap of faith for complex problems like this. You can't dot every I and cross every T when you're talking of community level work in a country as complex as India. So thank you. I'll not forget that Navy versus pirate analogy.
Thank you. One more comment, and I when we were prepping for this, Navya had a comment I really want to make sure we get in as well. But to your point about scale, right? My challenge with scale when it comes to India has always been that if you're trying to solve a problem for Netherlands, your opinion can be very different, right? Because the birth rate of Netherlands and the number of people and the average income and every other demographic that you can look at is, to your points, not complex. Right? You look at the average birth rate of India on 70% of the country being low income, right? You are going to have a real challenge. My one request to everybody, I promised everybody that the audience is the 4th panelist, and I am going to stay true to that. So one of the things that we will ask you is, to that very question, that should people make scale a factor of consideration in making their decisions philanthropically, whether it's time or money. Again, if there's a comment that you would love to have included that's not been said, and I will actually read them out as well, along with bringing mics. But I do want to ask Navya that question because you've sort of you've chosen very consciously, right, to your point. So again, does scale matter in where you choose to invest time and why?
Yeah, I forgot what I said earlier, so I'm going to wing it now, but I completely agree with what when we're looking at, and this comes up a lot in the conversations I have with other Teach for India alum as well. For India, we cannot solve a problem without thinking about scale. Everything is at scale, and it requires so much effort of working at the community level. And I also don't think it's an either or. It's not like this or that. It's also thinking about, going back to the comment I made earlier about how understanding how impact and change can happen at the depth of the work that you do, and how does that transform into the scale of the work as well. And I say that because scale to me doesn't mean it's a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to be a solution that can be owned and localized and driven by the local communities, and that is also scale. It's not necessarily one product or one tool that can be distributed across. It's also having that shared ethos and values and mindsets in achieving whatever you hope to achieve with your mission. So, yeah.
So Janvi, I want to ask, as somebody who is actively choosing which path to pursue, right? What do you look at that and say, hey, this org has depth, that's where I want to continue to be? Or do you look at this as scale and that's really important to me long term, right? Because I think there was a great point made about keeping talent in the sector, right? So where do you come at it from?
I definitely resonate with both of your opinions on scale matters. But I truly believe that when you can identify the depth, then you can scale. Like if an org can go deep into its mission and values, the problem it's trying to solve, only then can they actually achieve impact at scale. This is my personal belief. I have partnered and spoken and done projects with multiple nonprofits here in the US, and sometimes they are tackling a very specific niche problem, which is not scalable, but it is important. However, there are many, many problems which need to be tackled at scale, like, for example, what Teach for India is doing, like education, or if it's healthcare. And if you can identify the solution first in depth and then go wide, then as an individual or as an org, it is definitely scalable.
It's interesting to see, by the way, that the audience sort of agrees, because I see a comment in here saying, how do you in a depth-based model weave in scale-based thinking early, right? Because it's the discipline that you will build right at the beginning that will sort of stay. That culture and founder vision is often so key. I am again to keeping the and because hopefully the moderators won't kill me, but I am actually gonna. I think there's one comment in the back.
Work in is not two-dimensional. This depth versus scale issue seems to make us think that we are working in a two-dimensional space. We are working in a hyper-dimensional space. So each issue we are addressing has multiple dimensions. So I just want to bring that into the discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to add in the similar vein that it depends on, are you looking at it from an organization's point of view, or are you looking at it from a society's point of view, right? So diabetes, 100% agree. If you want to, as a society, solve that problem, scale is important. But can one organization scale and solve it at that level? I think that's the question, right? So when you look at an organization, what is the right scale for that organization to do both in-quality depth work to the communities they work with, and scale? Maybe there is a limit, natural limit, that the organization can reach. And then they need to work with other organizations to scale it up further beyond that level.
I think there is, when I was putting this panel together, there was a big debate in my head about, do I keep it just to education or do I represent multiple sectors? And I think both of your points are actually why I've kept it to just education. Because every sector is so unique in how much can, to your point, where's that ceiling, right? There is a glass ceiling for most of the work we do on where do you stop your journey and maybe tack on or combine with another person's journey. Can I actually encourage, there's by the way some great questions which we'll try to take around just education policy in general, right? But to the question of scale, right? Unilaterally achieving scale as a single founder or mission-led organization is very difficult. That is one of the reasons I do want to give a shout out to the IPAs and the Indiasporas of the world, because it does force us, for the lack of a better word, to come together and share our theses and our perspectives and find ways to collaborate, even if operationally that may or may not always be quite that easy. I think we had one more comment in the back, so I want to make sure I don't miss it. Please.
I have been listening to this, and obviously I agree that everything in India needs to have scale to really solve the problem and make an impact. At the same time, what I don't want to have is for people to start saying, oh, because I can't scale up, I won't start. And if you look at the Silicon Valley model, it's start up, scale up, roll up, go public. So I think if we think along those terms, multiple people can start things, but what they've got to realize is that effectively what they're learning, if they can be shared with somebody else, there is a saving of resources and stuff. And so join forces together without losing, if necessary, part of what you feel is your independence, but collaborate to success and solve the big problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great stepping stone journey, right? I don't know that as a sector, philanthropically, we are there yet, but you're probably spot on that.
I would add, right,
please.
to that point, just like organizations scale, if they have the resources, they can attract talent, and each talent, which is hypo, is worth, like 8x their sort of whatever the thing is, right? So if you can get good, passionate people like, to my left and my right as well. It doesn't have to be merger, right? You could expand your capacity if you have the resources and Each leader sort of adds so much layers to it, right? That's how we've grown businesses. I think that's the model for, the not-for-profits as well.
Yeah. I think one of the other comments, and I think there's some great ones coming, so please keep them going. I promise we'll actually try and balance as many of them as possible, right? I think there was a great conversation recently when we think about scale. The caution I'd make about how do we start thinking as founders of scaling early, or what are the models, right? There were some comments around what are some models on scale. Don't forget the user. Right, I think that's a thing that happens a lot. We recently, UNGA was just the UN General Assembly. There were a lot of events in New York last week. Shaheen attended a few of them, and there's literally a dedicated center. I won't name them again because the idea is not to cause trouble, but basically they had a whole day of education strategy sessions, and Shaheen's first observation after attending them was there was not a single student present. Right, so we have to also really remember when we think about scale, or when we think about taking these lessons out of Silicon Valley or corporate or even our philanthropic experiences, that we somehow don't forget the end user in the process, and that they're part of designing that model for scale. Because I think some of the glass ceiling work happens very quickly because of that, that we sort of lose them from that journey. I guess, Navya, as somebody who has taken an organization from, who started with depth and then kind of worked your way across both sides of the spectrum, what is something that helps you drive that scale, and how do you maybe address that question of how do you build that discipline?
I think it's the outlook and the way that the team believes in what scale can unlock and do, and the approach that we take for that. It goes back to what I shared earlier about my depth that I had in the 2 years of the fellowship still drives a lot of the lens in which I look at the work, in which we make decisions within the organization, and how I talk to teachers and learners and others. But what I have grown to believe, and what I fundamentally have a strong belief in, is the power of open source public goods. And the open source public goods unlocks partnerships and collaborations. We're a team of just 25, but we have worked with so many different organizations around the world, and that is the power of partnerships. And this was also said at UNGA last week, partnership is the new leadership. And I strongly believe in that, because the only way that we can unlock impact at scale again and take whatever learnings and lessons we have from the classroom, the best examples, and bring it to scale is if we have those partnerships, and if we follow open source collaborative models and partnerships, and having sustainable models where we're co-funded by organizations, where there's collaborations and coalitions, because there's so many different pieces of the puzzle, and Shaheen always talks about that. What is your piece of the puzzle that you're solving in education? And it takes so many pieces of the puzzle in order to move and shift outcomes. So I go back to that always in terms of what it is and what my approach is.
Yeah. And open source goods is as much IP and knowledge and process and systems, right? Not just what you do as a model. I think one of the questions that came through as well, which I think it would be valuable on, and I'm conscious of time, so I want to make sure we get the next question as well, is, we are a much more analytical driven society than ever before. Even what does data mean is getting questioned, right? I think you can probably lean into the skepticism more than all the rest of us combined, right? But the world is in a complicated place, right? ROI is a phrase we see and hear constantly in the world around us. So as we think about this dichotomy of forces, to your point, that are even hyperdimensional, not just bidimensional, what is one advice you would give to people in how they calculate impact ROI for organizations, right? Because we're all making choices. We're all making either or decisions or choices in where we spend our time or our energy. So maybe, Vipul, if we can start off with you.
So look, at a very simple level, I was thinking from whatever level we want to give for, if you think of how our money spending decisions happen, there is the impulse shopping that happens, right? You go to a grocery store, you go to a market, somebody calls a friend, you see an earthquake, you see a fire, you're like, oh, I want to do that, right? That's kind of the impulse action. And then think of how you spend your money in buying a house. right? There's so much analytics that goes behind it, right? You look at your model, you look at sort of what happens 10 years later, will it give me the appreciation or not, et cetera, et cetera. So very considered, deliberate, lot of inputs kind of decision, because that's the decision for the long term. And I have come to believe that as you grow older in life and you kind of start to want to do systematic giving, it kind of is the equivalent of buying a house, right? So be sure about, like you buy a house, you first say, does it speak to me or not? Right? If you want to live in the house. If you're doing investment, that's a different matter, but does it speak to you or not, right? So to the cause that speaks to you, you put the more systematic behind it, which means that the organization that you support or the cause that you support, is it sustainable, or is it like, because they have money, it'll kind of go, and then after that it kind of peters out, so to say. And to me, just using the same business analogy, the cost economics, or unit economics matters everywhere, right? If somebody is dividing a service, not-for-profit is delivering a service, whatever that cause is that cost in that crowded world, is that sustainable cost? Is it the lowest cost? Because that's how the volume will come, right? So look for organizations and stuff who have the lower unit economics, which are sustainable, and who then, because of sustainability, get onto the flywheel of attracting good talent, attracting good donors, getting the recognition with policy and with government, so that they can cause a bigger ripple of their actions, right? That's how I broadly kind of think about it.
Got it. Okay. So ROI is, if I had to bottle it down, kind of somebody's ability to take, replicate, and combine, for the lack of a better word.
Thank you.
Navya?
Yeah, I think the first thing, I agree with a lot of that. The first thing I would say is I don't believe ROI in the terms of cost per learner. I am not a proponent of that. I think there's so much more to ROI when we look at missions and the outcomes that nonprofits hope to achieve. One is, of course, learning outcomes. How do we measure learning outcomes? What is the kind of behavior change and all of the things? And what are the holistic ways in which systems change happens? What are the policies, practices? And then at the end, I think it's also the equity piece. Who is being left behind and who is being represented in the work that you do? And it goes back to keeping teachers and learners at the center. And so it needs to be beyond cost per learner, and it needs to look at things more holistically and what it means. I think we need to have very rigorous impact evaluations, not necessarily has to be RCTs, but at the same time, it needs to be more holistic in terms of what we evaluate as a return and not just cost.
Fair enough. As the talent is what powers the ship, right? We all know that that's the one thing that can take any organization, whether private or public sector, through the biggest of storms. How do you assess impact when you look at an organization and say, is this the org I would want to work for?
So this is very insightful to hear from people who are sort of looking at that from the top-down approach. But as a talent, I do think that ROI also comes at an individual level of each employee or each person working in the org. So if there is an ROI for me personally in terms of the impact that I have made, like you said, who's getting left behind? How am I measuring? How many people have I reached? How many students have I reached? There is a second layer of measuring impact. What change has the student made in terms of their lives? Like, it's a very meta impact metric, but that's just an example. So if I can see my personal ROI, I can very well align with an organization's mission and values, and that in turn generally multiplies the impact metrics across an org. So just like from a bottom-up approach, individually there is an ROI as well, and of course there is a different ROI when you look at from the top.
I think there was a comment made earlier today, right? Don't think with your heart, think with your head. It won't all go sideways, right? So I think what I'm hearing across all levels of the spectrum, whether you're a leader at the social sector organization, a talent, or a advisor or a donor, is that you want to make sure that measurement is a part of your discipline, because I don't think ROI as a terminology is evil, but maybe looking at it holistically. I saw a bunch of comments around the climate, by the way, so I'll share one little fun anecdote. One of the best things I've heard recently is there was a movement that tried to get corporate entities to change how they report their P&Ls. And so you had to report your P&Ls with, we made this much profit and we had this much environmental costs that we caused. And so then you do your net profit based on that. So basically, if you were drilling company. It's like, okay, this was my dollar cost of basically going and displacing population X or whatever it was, right? So I think the intangible often gets lost in the ROI. And I think that is something that we have to be very disciplined about when it comes to scale as well. One of the things that Navya had said, which she was very sweet, she's like, I don't think I remember what I said, but the thing that I found most amazing is she said one of the biggest values I got from the whole depth experience is it changed what the definition of equity means for me. And that has changed everything else, right? So I say the same for my personal career trajectory, where if you got the raw skills and the right mindset early on with some depth work, it allows you to go very broad across a lot of different areas and drive a very different domain of change. So I do think that as you think about, especially given that we have a lot of people that support great depth in organizations, as you think about that scale, please do take a serious moment to think about what are those intangibles that you are actually sort of having in there. Very quickly, does anybody want to chime in on the ROI? What has been your sort of gold standard on measuring ROI? Otherwise, I want to, please.
I work with Community Pure Water and raising funds. The donors always ask us, where is our investment going? How much return are you going to see on this? It's not return on investment, it's return on impact. So you do have to measure impact to all the points that you've made and everybody's discussed all morning. But it's, again, what metrics do you measure? So with the work we do, it's very clear, it's very obvious that you drink clean water, you don't fall sick. Very direct. And then if you don't fall sick, then you can do all the wonderful things that everybody else here is offering, right? So that's one metric we measure. The second metric we measure is to see, are women being freed of the burden of fetching water? So you have to pick an obvious metric in your themes of work, in your missions, to be able to not have to do an M&E survey, to just be able to talk about it so easily. Those surveys, those measures are required to prove certain things, the evidences, but something anecdotal so powerful that men collect water, I mean, that's very impactful.
Yeah. I think, again, just knowing that I'm going to get the time card any moment, I think the comment that I do want to hopefully have everybody leave with today is that if your organization truly is at a place where it's doing depth work, can scale, but is not, I think based on what got said in this room by multiple people, we have to take a hard look at ourselves and be honest and say, do we need to do that roll up, right? If we truly can't scale up, maybe we are not meant to go the full stepping stone journey, and we should look at either partnering or merging or some other combination thereof. And I think in a good way, I guess what's evident is there's a real spectrum on depth versus scale, right? So it's not that binary. In an ideal world, if you can find a model that combines both, where it allows you to be really deep for a period of time and maybe really wide for a period of time thereafter, right? Whether it's entrepreneurship programs like Vipul was saying, or what happens in the alumni movement after. I think if we can find a way to have patient capital to support both. So my challenge to everybody, given that this is a depth-centric room, is don't just get lost in the stories, right? Because those stories need to scale, because in India, it would take, at least for education, it would take 7 generations for a family to break out of the cycle of poverty if there is not an intervention of quality education, right? And if we just went by paying for that one child, instead of trying to create leaders who can change it for hundreds of children, what we are going to see is we won't keep up with the birth rate, right? So I think, again, for this diaspora, first off, thank you for being the 4th panel member. I appreciate that tremendously. Thank you for the patience with the unpanel. But I want to thank Vipul, Navya, and Janvi for putting up with the unconventional format and the last tries. But I, again, really want to emphasize that if you would like to learn more from anybody here or otherwise, this was a question we saw all morning on Slido as well, like how do I connect with people? I think most of the people in this room are still here because they want to share and they want to learn. So please reach out. Please feel free to tap anybody who's from Indiaspora or IPA or any of us, and let's do it the old-fashioned way, as much as I've been promoting the tech, and swap WhatsApp numbers or emails or a quick phone call or text. But again, thank you so much for all your patience today.